Most people think fighter jets are all about speed, power, and high-tech weapons. And that's true. But what they don't see is how dangerous these planes can be, even to the people flying them. Some jets were rushed into service. Others were built with insane power but little control. Some just had design flaws that never got fixed. And then there were planes that were so fast, so twitchy, or so unstable that only the best pilots in the world could handle them. And even then, not all of them came back. Let's break that down. A lot of fighter jets were made during times when countries were in a hurry. Maybe there was a war going on. Maybe they were falling behind their enemies. Maybe they just wanted to prove something. Whatever the reason, some planes got pushed out of the factory and into the air before they were truly ready. Take the early jet age, the 1950s and 60s. That was a time when new jets were being built every couple of years. Engineers were still figuring out how jet engines worked, how wings should be shaped, and how to make planes go faster than sound without shaking themselves apart. Some designs were barely tested. They'd build a few, fly them a couple of times, and then say, "Yep, good enough." Pilots would get a short briefing and then be told, "You're flying this tomorrow." It didn't always end well. Then you had the planes that had way too much power but not enough control. They were rockets with wings. The engines were monsters, big, loud, and fast. But the rest of the jet couldn't always keep up. They'd go from 0 to supersonic in seconds, but once they got there, they were hard to steer. Some would stall if you turned too hard, others would spin out if you lost just a little speed, and a few had problems so bad that pilots couldn't even eject safely. 1 second you were in control, the next, the jet was upside down, or rolling, or dropping like a stone. And then there were the jets with design flaws. Some of these flaws were small but deadly, like landing gear that collapsed, or wings that broke under pressure, or ejection seats that didn't work right. Some jets had poor visibility. The pilot couldn't even see what was above or behind them. Others had weak engines that failed at high altitude. Some had control systems that lagged or locked up. And instead of fixing the problems, some governments just said, "Fly it anyway." Why? Because fixing it would cost too much. Without the computer, those planes wouldn't fly straight for 5 seconds. And even with the computer, a split-second glitch could send the jet tumbling. That's what we mean by twitchy. These planes are so sharp, so sensitive, that a small movement of the stick can send them flipping over. The controls are touchy. The response is instant. The margin for error is razor thin. Let's start with the ones that were flat out deadly, not to the enemy, but to the guys flying them. 1. F-104 Starfighter, the Widowmaker. This one had the looks of a rocket and flew like one too. Long, thin fuselage, short, stubby wings. It was built to fly high and fast, not to turn and dogfight. But the real problem? It didn't forgive mistakes at all. The F-104 had a tiny wing area, which meant it needed high speed just to stay in the air. Takeoffs and landings were tricky. If you stalled, you probably weren't going to recover. It had a single engine. If that failed, you were done. And worst of all, many pilots didn't even get a chance to eject. In Germany, over 270 pilots died flying the F-104. That's not a typo. They called it the Widowmaker for a reason. And yet, some countries kept flying it for decades. Why? Because it was fast, cheap, and could carry nuclear weapons. But it came at a price. 2. MiG-21. Fast, cheap, and deadly, even to its own side. The MiG-21 was one of the most widely built fighter jets in history. Over 11,000 were made, but it wasn't exactly safe. It was fast, sure, Mach 2 speed, sleek shape, and pretty reliable for its time. But it had a few problems. First, it had short range and almost no radar, so it wasn't great at hunting down enemies unless they were right in front of it. Second, the ejection seat was unreliable in early models. If something went wrong, you might not make it out alive. And third, landing it was a nightmare. It came in fast and didn't slow down easily. Pilots had to be exact. The Indian Air Force lost over 200 MiG-21s in crashes. Pilots called it the flying coffin. Even today, a few countries still use them, but they've learned the hard way just how dangerous the plane can be. 3. F-100 Super Sabre. This was America's first fighter that could fly faster than the speed of sound in level flight. Cool, right? But the F-100 had a major flaw. It could get into something called a pitch up at high speeds. That's when the nose suddenly kicks upward without warning, flipping the plane into uncontrollable spin. Once it happened, there was almost no chance of recovery. Add to that its sharp roll rate and unstable design, and it meant pilots had to be extra careful not to push the plane too hard. Between 1954 and 1971, the U.S. Air Force lost over 800 F-100s in accidents, and that's just peacetime losses. Some pilots mastered it, others didn't get the chance. 4. BAE Harrier. Vertical takeoff, vertical trouble. Now, the Harrier isn't what you'd call a bad plane, but it was one of the hardest to fly. Why? Because it could take off and land vertically like a helicopter. That sounds great until you realize that vertical flight means no margin for error. A little gust of wind or a small mistake on the throttle and you could crash right into the ground, even on takeoff. In the U.S. Marines, the AV8 Harrier had one of the highest accident rates of any military jet. One study said it was as dangerous as combat just to fly it in training. The controls were delicate, the balance was tricky, and if something went wrong during hover, you didn't have time to recover. These next jets weren't just deadly, they were overpowered, overbuilt, and often too advanced for their time. 5. F14 Tomcat. Beauty and the Beast. We all know the F-14 from Top Gun, but that movie didn't show the full story. The early F-14s were fast, mean, and armed with the deadly Phoenix missile system, but they had a few dangerous flaws. The engines were a big one. The F-14 used TF-30 engines that were known to stall in high-speed turns or under heavy G-forces. If one engine stalled and the other kept pushing, the jet would flat spin, and most of the time, you couldn't pull out of it. That killed several pilots. It also had a huge airframe, and while that helped with range and weapons, it made the jet less nimble than smaller fighters like the F-16. The Navy lost dozens of F-14s in peacetime accidents, many of them due to engine problems. 6. MiG-23. Fast, loud, and unstable. The MiG-23 was a Soviet swing-wing jet designed to fight American fighters and bombers. But it had a bad habit. It didn't like low speeds. When its wings were swept forward for landing, the plane became wildly unstable. The center of gravity would shift, and unless the pilot handled it just right, it could tip, stall, or even flip. Worse, the engine wasn't reliable. Engine flameouts weren't rare. And visibility from the cockpit? Terrible. Eastern Bloc pilots had a saying, "It flies fast, just don't try to land it." 7. F11 Arvar. Not quite a fighter, not quite a bomber, and not quite safe. The F-111 was an odd plane. Fast, heavy, and built for low-level bombing at supersonic speeds. But the early models had major issues. Some of them had structural failures. One type of wing support literally broke mid-flight. Others had problems with the escape system. It didn't use ejection seats at first. It used a whole escape pod. Sounds good, but if it failed, both crew members were trapped. Several F-111s crashed during early testing and training. Some due to terrain-following radar errors, some due to engine failure, some just broke apart. It got better later, but the early days were full of danger. Now let's talk about the jets that were so advanced or so experimental, they were basically accidents waiting to happen. 8. XF-104, X-15, and other X-planes. These weren't production jets, they were test aircraft, but they were some of the most dangerous machines ever flown. The X-15, for example, flew at Mach 6.7, over 4,500 miles per hour. That's nearly 7 times the speed of sound. And yes, people flew it. They also died flying it. One X-15 pilot was killed when the jet spun out of control at the edge of space. His body was never fully recovered. The XF-104, the prototype of the F-104, had ejection problems and flight control issues. Test pilots were guinea pigs in the most literal sense. Every time they took off, they knew they might not land. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to see more videos like this.